Welcome to Modern Mystic Messages. I'm Teresa, and thank you for stopping by. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. In any event, Soul Family, I'm happy that you're here. And if you are seeing this video on the day that I'm uploading it, happy Sunday to you. If you're seeing it at a later date, no worries because the message is timeless and timely. So whenever it's crossing your path, that's exactly when Spirit intended for you to see it. So welcome, and you're right on time. Now, I do want to ask if you would please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, because we're about to get into some really cool things that I've been seeing, had on my mind a lot lately. And we're going to get into the Sunday message, but before we do, I want to backtrack and touch on a video that I did a few days ago when I first started looking into the book of Judas, or the Gospel according to Judas, or the Gospel of Judas. Is not according to, because he did not write it, it's just telling the story. And we only touched the surface of that. It's a small book that gets into a lot of deep Gnostic teachings. But one of the things that I meant to mention in that book was a couple of things that struck out to me and I think are very pertinent if we apply them to other areas of the scriptures. Is in the very beginning of the book, it mentioned the fact that that Yeshua often did not appear to his disciples as himself. Often he appeared as a child. And we see a little bit of that because if you'll remember when we were looking at the Gospel of John last Sunday, last Sunday we talked a lot about the Gospel of John, and right after the resurrection, when Mary Magdalene entered into the tomb, she recognized that there were angels there attending the site, but she did not see. She was coming to tend to the body of Yeshua, but it wasn't there. There were two angels there. And then someone came up behind her, and she thought, the scriptures say, she thought it was the gardener. It wasn't until he said Mary that she recognized that it was indeed the rabbi. And she got ready to fall into his arms, and he told her, no, not yet. But that is another example that, of course, Mary Magdalene, of all people, they said she was the one that was the absolute closest to Yeshua. And yet, she didn't recognize him. And even if we think about other scriptures where Thomas wanted to know, is it really you? And he wanted to stick his hand in the side and all of that and feel where they had stabbed him and all of that. He wanted to feel the wounds, the stigmata and all of that, because facially he had changed his appearance. Now, does that not seem like someone that might have some, I don't want to call it off planetary origins or extraplanetary origins? We, even to this day, they talk about reptilians and shapeshifters on the planet here and now in 2025. But it does mention that Yeshua had that capability as well, so much so that he would often blend into the crowd of his teachers, of his students, appearing as a child. And then later on, he would appear as himself. One of the other things, excuse me, that I wanted to mention, now, in the book of Judah, he did a lot of laughing at him, and it wasn't ha ha laughing, it was kind of a tongue in cheek laugh. But one of the things that he laughed at, because he was saying that the things that they were doing, they were preaching and teaching, they weren't praying. At the time when the book starts, they were doing praying the Eucharist, or the prayer of thanksgiving. And he was saying, you're not doing this of your own will, you're doing it so your God will be praised. And then the disciples said that he was the son of their God, and Yeshua corrected them, that he said, you don't know me. And he said, no generation of the people among you will know me. I find that very telling, because that's when they get into the conversation with Judas, and he takes him and shows him the heavenly realms and all of that. And he pointed to the generation of people that would actually know him, and told Judas he wouldn't see him either. because even though he was selected to play the part of the betrayer, he had greater spiritual knowledge than all of the other disciples. He knew where Yeshua was coming from. And yet, however it went down, not only did Yeshua pick him to play the part of the betrayer, but on a deeper level, spiritually, he had been overcome by the spirit of Yaldabaoth or Saklas. And so Yeshua called him the 13th demon and showed him the heavenly realms. And because remember, Yeshua in other places said, in my Father's house there are many abodes, and there I go to prepare a place for you. And in the vision, he showed him the glass floors and the gold and the this and that, and said that none of the disciples that he, or none of the generation of disciples that he was teaching would see that place, and neither would Judas, even though he had advanced spiritual knowledge. And then he pointed to a time in the future where he was going to be coming back. And it kind of looks like, if you know the Bible story, it sounds like he's pointing to the time when he will be coming back to be the administrator or overseer of the Battle of Armageddon and the cleanup project that happens in Revelation. And that generation, the one that he was talking about, that was going to have the Holy Spirit come to them as on the individual level as helpers, those would be the generation, our generation. I mean, we can, a lot of people can sit there and try to convince themselves we're not in that generation, but honestly, it's a beautiful thing to think that we are, if we're aware of what's going on and preparing ourselves for it. Now, if we continue to rock on in the blindness that the Jews of that time and the early Christians and all the other ones after that are saying, because of following what man has told them it means, maybe we don't want that day to come. But if you understand it, it's not a bad thing. Now, we're not going to get too far off on that. That's enough of there. I just wanted to kind of recap that, and we may go back and revisit it. But the request for today is a discussion of the book of Job. I actually have a very dear friend that's in the um, Ascension group that I have on WhatsApp, and he has a lot of other people. Once upon a time, this brother was actually in seminary, very close to graduation, wanting to become an ordained minister and all of that good stuff. So he spent a few years in seminary studying a lot of the ancient texts and all of that. And I met him as one of my solstice gifts in 2020, when I was just beginning to get a lot of this understanding. And I had asked for any of the ascended masters that would come forth to connect, let me make themselves known to me. And immediately Yeshua made himself known as Saint Germain and then Thoth. And that year around solstice time, I had some very interesting physical confirmations, if you will, of what was happening. And I had gone through an ascension, or an initiation, excuse me, study group and all of that. And during that solstice season, I met this brother that was in seminary. I mean, we're chat friends online. He's in another country, but I just knew that I was going to be off-putting to him, because look, I can't tell you how many preachers that said I was a troublemaker or I was just trying to be difficult when I was asking genuine questions back in the day, and I couldn't get answers. So the information that I was recently becoming aware of, I was like, you know what? Let me just go ahead on and break it on down. And if he gonna shoo me away, he'll shoo me away. But when I started letting him know the things that I had come to understand about religion overall and Christianity in particular, and all of that, at the end of everything that I had said, he was like, "No, you're correct. You're not misunderstanding. We're taught all of that in seminary, but we're also taught not to teach it to the people lest they get confused, or in other words, lest they learn the truth, because it ain't no confusion about it. All you got to do is tell me, I did read this with comprehension and I understand what I'm reading, and I understood those texts over there that I'm reading, and admit that we're understanding the truth. But the church cannot and will not do that. Because if they admitted the truth, or if they were willing to acknowledge the legitimacy of the Babylonian, Akkadian, and Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki texts, if the church were to acknowledge the legitimacy of those texts, religion as we know it will be over tomorrow. And that's why they won't. It's not that they're not aware of it, and it's not that those documents are not legitimate, but they tell more of the truth than the religious organizations on this planet want us to know. They've crafted a very particular narrative, and all of those other ancient texts, the ones that they said aren't inspired of God, they claim this is inspired of God. Well, yeah, it is, but which God is it inspired of? And again, I read the Bible. I'm not knocking it. I'm not knocking anybody that's still in religion, because we're all programmed for that. That's what Yahweh insisted on. We literally have a worship gene inserted in us, in our hardcore wired into our DNA, to give us the propensity to worship. But the master geneticist, Father Enki, the true, if you want to call one of them, or one of the Elohim in the Bible, the creator, it would be Lord Enki, because Lord Enlil, gave the command for what he wanted, but he was initially against the genetic project altogether. But then once he agreed upon it, he was like, well, if you're going to do this, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. And they're never to know we're not gods, and you're going to put a worship gene in them. And then later on, he got aggravated that we were living too long and insisted that they go back in and cap our telomeres to limit our lifespan and several things like that. They were steadily tweaking the genome as the project continued. So, but any event, that's a tangent. We ain't got to go much further down. I wanted to talk about Job, because it's another one of those instances when we're looking at Yeshua. I believe, I can't remember, I think he's been likened to as the greater Job in some place. But in any event, Job was a man of faith and all of that. And it talks about this, the way he was tested. That's where Christianity always takes a look at that. No matter what, his faith was tested, and it was tested by the devil, and he was he was faithful and all of that. But, excuse me, it occurred to me there's a lesson in that same book that people do not really understand. It's completely, in my opinion, missed when we look at that, because we're busy looking at it from the aspect of it was just so important for Job to prove himself faithful. But why? Let's look at this, because I want to kind of analyze. And trust me, Job is such a long book. We are definitely not going to read all of it. What we need, we can get pretty much out of the first 2 chapters, and then because they spend literally 30 chapters with this poetic style of roaming of first. Well, we'll get there. Let's just take a look, shall we? There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camel, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. Now it's interesting, because right here in that verse we have a 10-10-10 message. 7 sons and 3 daughters is 10. 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, so 10,000 camels. 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys. 10, 10, 10. So he was due for a rebirth. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. Now we're going to find out a little bit later. It's interesting that he did that because truthfully, it says that he was a righteous man and he was upright. He feared God and turned away from evil. But in that scripture right there, it also indicates that he was doing a little bit of blanket coverage because Job was from the east towards the Inkiite lands. If anything, he would have been making vegetable and fruit offerings. That was what the issue was when the two brothers of Adam, sons of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, or Cain and Abel as we call them. Cain made the animal sacrifice. I'm sorry, and Abel did the vegetables and fruits, and yet at the time, the God or the Elohim that was looking at them favored Abel's sacrifice, and Cain got upset, so upset that he committed the first M word that we have in recorded history because he slew, as they say, his brother. So Job, even though he was a righteous man and they said he didn't do anything wrong and all that, just in case his kids did something wrong, even though he was from the east, he still did the burnt offering. So he was covering both of the Elohim. Now it says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Now, I'm going to stop here because that seems forthright or pretty straightforward. But what people fail to consider, where it says there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Got to go back to Genesis. Remember, the Lord and the Lord God are two separate Elohim. And the sons of God could be a couple of different things. It talks about how the sons of God took the daughters of men. Well, the sons of God were the offspring of the Watchers, the hybridized, right? Because like the Anunnaki, who were supposed to be mining the gold and all of that, they were put as sentinels around. They were called them the Watchers, but they mutinied after Dumuzi took a human bride. They was like, "Oh, no, no, no. We're going to go out and take the daughters of men as well." And they began to mate with human females. And the offspring of those were called the Nephilim or whatnot, but they also were referred to as the sons of God. And you also have to remember, even though the Bible mentions the Elohim just in the general sense, there was way more Elohim on the planet than just Enlil and Enki. Inanna was still there. Ishtar was still there. Ninki, what's her name? I can't. All of them. Initially, Alalu came by himself and then touched down, and then once he came back, I think he wound up coming back, and then Enlil came down to kind of survey everything and see what was going on. And then once after he came and they decided they were going to set up the base camp and create the Eden, and he went to the Abzu and they plotted out all these different places and made these base camps before they started bringing in the Shonuff crew. Earth was crawling with these Anunnaki beings. So when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord and Satan came in amongst them, the type Satan or Enlil, Yahweh, Jehovah, one of his primary titles when he came here from Nibiru, he had the title of Lord of the Command, but his other title was Satan of the Eden. Satan and Enlil are the same person. Satan and Yahweh are the same individuals. So during this meeting that they are having, the sons of God, Dumuzi and Nidimud and Ninurta and all of them came before the Lord. And typically in here, like I said, we got the Lord and the Lord God. The Lord is typically Enki, not Yahweh. The other possible context for this, if you don't want to accept the fact that it's Enki, it could have been during the time period that Anu, their daddy, came down. Because he didn't physically come here with the rest of the crew because he was active ruler on Nibiru, but he did pull up here. They showed they behind so bad that he actually rolled up on them one time. But they have to be careful. Well, I ain't gonna say have to be careful. The way when they travel to Nibiru, it needs, because of the distance and time and the gravitational pull, the effect that Nibiru has when it approaches Earth. They visit Nibiru they visit Earth in connection or in conjunction with the elliptical orbit of Nibiru as it comes close enough to Earth that they can, come through and fire the ships and come without messing with our poles. Because from what the ancient texts indicate, the gravitational pull of Nibiru on Earth is significant, and it causes extreme natural disasters when it pulls up in close proximity. So anyway, so we got the sons of God present before the Lord, most likely Enki, and Satan, Enlil, Yahweh, also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And he answered, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does God fear Job? Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You've blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he'll curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now, if if we consider what I just said about who the Lord is and who Satan is and who the sons of God are in all of this, you've got a man here. It says that he's from the east. So this was at a point when they had split. After this is most likely, again, the Bible is not chronologically presented, but it sounds like this happened after the Tower of Babel had happened and all the rest of that. And at that point in time, Enki's lands and the Anunnaki that kind of went along with Enki's more compassionate, less violent way of teaching, those got pushed over into the East, where you find the Buddhism and the Taoism and the Hinduism and the Jainism and all that over towards the East. But Yahweh is on a power grab for the whole earth. So he's taunting him and saying, of course he serves you. You give him everything, but I bet you if you take some of that cushion out from under you, he won't push you, he won't serve you then, because remember, Yahweh been ruling with an iron fist, an iron bloody fist, ever since he got here. He said humans ain't little better than roaches, and you gotta ride herd on them, and if they don't act right, unalive them. And you keep the threat of unalive, you keep your foot on their neck if you want to get anything out of them. That's the temperament, that is the way of Yahweh. So he's literally coming in here taunting his brother, saying that, of course, Job is your faithful servant because you give him everything. But I guarantee you, if he don't have it so tough, he's only serving you because of what you give him. That ain't real service. You want to test him, see how he'll do when you take all of his stuff from him. So Enki said, okay. But now the lesson that I want to look at, this is a pissing contest between two brothers. And for want of making a point, Yahweh was willing to go and unalive 10 of this man's children and 1,000 of his cattle. Let's see what it says now. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Excuse me. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. And the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I have come from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So Job was still willing to give God the benefit of the doubt, but according to this, simultaneously, every single thing this man had, and all of the livestock, all of the camel, all of the oxen, all of the servants, and all of his children, in one day's time, Yahweh took them all out just to prove a point. That's the nature of the God of the Bible. That was one of the things that I had such a difficult time sitting with, because like I said, as a teenager, I wanted to know Yahweh. I did. I thought I grew up being taught that the God of this Bible was Jehovah. Like I said, I belong to an organization that wears his name proudly. They kind of sort of push Jesus to the back, so that they are adamantly worshiping Jehovah. So that's what I was born and taught to do. But I wanted to know the true nature of Yahweh, because what I was reading in the scriptures didn't quite mesh with, it says in this book that God is love. But the longer I read this book, I wasn't hearing very loving things when you're describing Yahweh. And then sometimes you do hear some things in Psalms that sound all lovely and nice and all of that. But then I had to come, when I started looking at some of those other texts, and realize that very often there's more than one Elohim being described here. But I'm like, for real, just to prove a point, you unalive 10 of this man's children, over 2,000 head of livestock, all of his servants, and everything else in one fell swoop, just to make a point. That's Yahweh. Now, why does anybody think that that's the God that has love for us, and that's the God that's going to come down and make all things new on the other side of Armageddon? Are you kidding? People, we got to wake up and think. Stop accepting the nonsense that they done told us and read this with understanding. They tell you in this book to search for yourself. and understand these things. And like I said, once you understand a few key principles about what they're talking about, even though they've carefully redacted it, and even though they done remix the heck out of it to fit their agenda, if you just take their word with a little bit of comprehension, you can see the lie hiding all up in the, you can see the truth hiding all up in the midst of the lie. Excuse me. Now, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came amongst them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. All that a man has, he'll give his for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and flesh, and he'll curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he's in your hand. Only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So you done took everything he had and stripped him down just about to the socks. And Yahweh came back and said, "No, no, no, give me that too." And gave this man boils all over his body. Can you imagine how painful that is? Anybody ever had a planter's wart on their foot? Just that alone is painful. He was covered in oozing sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his body overnight. Leprosy, if it was truly leprosy, that's a slow process. And from what I understand, it don't really get super painful until it gets pretty advanced. But he went from having everything and being a wealthy merchant with a sterling reputation like no other, happy everything, and all of that was stripped from him overnight. And then a few days later, his physical health was attacked too, all by Yahweh to prove a point. And then, if that wasn't enough, he sent Yahweh sent in the three magpies, and by them I mean Job's so-called friends. Cause Lord help me, with friends like that, who needs enemies? It said, when Job's three friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they came each from his own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. And no one spoke a word to them, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Now, I done call these brothers magpie. They sound like loyal companions, don't they? And I said the three magpies, and I meant every word of it, because we ain't gonna read into all of it, but almost from the very beginning, they said they sat with him for 7 days in silence. And then after that, Job came out in chapter 3. It said that he laments that he cursed the day of his birth. He was so miserable. He said, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it." Now, he goes on and on because he waxes real poetic here, and I'm not going to read all of that because we're getting kind of late. But then Eliphaz began, and they start nitpicking this brother. "Remember who that was innocent ever perished, or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same." By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they're consumed. Now that's just the mildness of it. That's one verse. They rocked on and talked ish to Job about how he must have done something to deserve all of this that God has befallen on him, not for one chapter, but for, let me see here. I ain't gonna read them because we'll be here all night and I ain't got the time or the stomach for it. For they rocked on and berated this man about how wrong he was and what he did wrong, and he had to be wrong, and God know what he doing, and only the evil get punished, and the blah 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 blah. For another, they started talking crap about him in chapter 4, and they continued on for 33 more chapters. the, Almost the entire book of Job, his so-called friends was busy berating him, letting him know how much he deserved everything that God had just done to him. He must be wicked. He had to been hiding something because God know what he doing and all of that. So, and again, I'm sure they telepathically can drive whatever. So they came as friends, but almost immediately sold out. And then instead of just going on about their business and leaving him alone, they sat there and picked and picked and picked and picked at him. He already covered in sores, and they came and pouring salt in him. They pouring wound salt, not literally, but verbally. This man is at the absolute lowest, grieving the loss of his children, the loss of his empire, and the loss of his health. And his so-called friends then came and spent 7 whole days with him, harping at him, telling him about how he must have done something to deserve this. And his wife then told him, curse God and die already. And then the Lord, but here's another thing that I wanted to come, and again, we close to the end because, and again, I'm not sure at the end of Job when they do finally decide, or right before the curses are lifted and he gets everything back, because he's restored. But how dare they think that you can kill off 10 children and just because he get 10 more on the other side that made it all right? You can't replace children like that. You can replace the oxen and the this and that, but what about the pain and suffering of sitting over there for weeks? Because he sat in silence for 7 days, and then they continued to pick on at him. So for at least 2 weeks of excruciating pain, oozing sores, and all of that, till, like I said, very up to the very limit of his physical stamina for life on this earth, he was tested just to prove a point between these two brothers. But interestingly enough, hold on. What did I want? Okay. It talks about now, it said, hear this, O Job, stop and consider the wondrous works of God. Do you know how God lays his command upon them and causes the lightning of his cloud to shine? Now remember, they always coming in the lightning and the cloud and the burning bush and all the rest of that. But this was with Elihu proclaiming God's majesty. It said, do you know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of him who is perfect in knowledge, you whose garments are hot when the earth is still because of the south wind? Can you, like him, spread out the sky as hard as a cast metal mirror? Again, they showed up a lot in the Vedic scriptures. You hear them talking about the Vimanas, and they were absolutely describing craft. The Hebrew scriptures talk about the fire and the stone and the wind and the this and that, but they only in Ezekiel do they describe what reasonable people could see as craft. But every time they show up, there's some form of special effects or physical subterfuge so that you don't actually see the beings. But that was how they used, those were the means that they used to disguise themselves. And that was at Yahweh's insistence that we not physically see them coming and going, that they always showed up in these supernatural ways so that we would think that they're gods. Now, It says, and no one looks on the light when it is bright in the skies, when the wind is past and cleared them. Out of the north comes the golden splendor. God is clothed with awesome majesty. The Almighty, we cannot find him. He is great in power, justice, and abundant righteousness. He will not violate. Therefore, men fear him. He does not regard any who are wise in their own conceit. And then the Lord answers Job finally. Now, whether this is Enki talking to Job or Enlil coming in and answering him before Enki restores Job to health, this part I'm not quite sure because, again, he appears in the whirlwind. Said, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man, and I will question you and that you make it known to me. Now, and again, I honestly think this is Enki or Yahweh talking because he does a lot of this braggadocious stuff and he lays claim to a lot of Enki's doings in creation, even in the Babylonian text and the Sumerian text and all the rest of that, all of this. Where was you when I did this? And can you top me on this? And all those statements of grandiosity, that really sounds a lot more like Enlil than it does Enki. But either way, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? And when I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band? Yeah, the more I think about this is for sure, almost for sure, Enlil speaking it, because neither Enlil nor Enki did the things that he's describing here. They landed on a planet that had already had its rudimentary terraforming and bioforming. Well, I ain't gonna say rudimentary. The terraforming on Ea, Earth, was done when they got here, according to their own records. There were already fish in the waters. There was already animals here. In fact, like you said, we were bioformed from an existing hominid that was here. And through their different iterations of their genetic modification program, they came up with Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, and all the rest of that until we finally get to the point of, I think they might have started. I don't remember if some of the. I honestly don't remember if they said they started with Homo Pithecus or not. But in any event, they pushed the evolutionary timetable up by 500,000 years by taking the hominid that was already here and genetically modifying it to come up with Homo sapiens sapiens. That's why we don't see an evolutionary missing link. They keep trying to. They found Lucy back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, whenever they found her and all the rest of that, but they've never truly found an evolutionary, midpoint, if you will, between species to prove natural evolution because the Anunnaki came and interrupted natural evolution. And for all the good religious folk out there that think that that's going too far or it can't happen, I want you to stop and think. We're cloning people on this planet. Well, they claim they're not actually cloning people, but if you really don't think they are, something wrong with you. When they announced in 1983, I think it was 83 that they said that they were announced cloning sheep. I already knew they announced cloning sheep in 83, but they was already cloning fish by then. They had already started cloning salmon and created tilapia in the lab. They can do in vitro fertilization. They took DNA off of fossil remains, and there are three dire wolves, prehistoric wolves that they have cloned and are living in preserves on this planet today. And if puny humans can do that, and we still can't figure out how to recreate the pyramids, do you really think it's far fetched to think that these beings could actually be the quote unquote gods of the Bible when their texts tell you that's what they did? But because we got some folks in funny hats that wave around and put all of this together and told us this was the one and only irrefutable word of God, then we will ignore all the other evidence and continue to only want to believe this pitifully pieced together story. And the only I mean, it's because it sounds amazing if you want to take it word for word and that's all you want to believe. But when you start reading with understanding, it's so shot full of holes, it only makes intelligent sense to pay attention to some of the rest of the story. That's why they don't want us to have the rest of the story. That's why the preachers and priests and imams told us not to listen to nothing else. Because they knew if we looked at the rest of the stuff, because they had the other information, that's what they cherry picked from to come up with this. Constantine had the bet when he asked the presbyters, the so-called followers of of Yeshua's teachings, to come to the Council of Nicaea and organize a religion that they could create a unified religion from. I said earlier they sat for 15 months to do it. They actually sat for 17 months and could not come up with an agreed upon understanding of what Christianity would be amongst the presbyters. So Constantine said, screw it. He had the best of his folks, and they literally culled a little bit from all of the religious knowledge that they had at the time. Not just Yeshua's teachings, not just the Judaic teachings, not just the Hindu teachings, not just the Egyptian teachings. They pulled in from everywhere. That's why they have crosses, but tell you that that represents the crucifixion implement of Yeshua. No, it don't, because guess what? That symbol was a sacred symbol to them long before Yeshua ever walked on the earth. Constantine was a sun worshiper. And what we see is that Byzantine cross that was on their seals, on their money, on their everything else. And even if you look at this, the Ankh, they turned around and cut. This is a symbol of life that the Anunnaki and later on, as the Egyptian pantheon used, they actually had tools of healing and energy that had this symbol. And when they created Christianity, they took the loop representing the womb off of this and left the ultraphallic symbol, because Christianity stopped acknowledging the divine feminine and balance and went into a very misogynistic, male-oriented religion. Women couldn't pray or prophesy. Women couldn't be in the temple without their heads uncovered. Women had to be in subjection to a man. And shoot, even in amongst the captives, they killed and plundered the men, but the women they could, they unalived the men. The women they took into captivity, and she couldn't even earn her freedom back. He had the right to do whatever he wanted to a female slave. And even if he wanted to, he had the choice to marry her, and she had absolutely no say so under the Yahwehistic religions. It's one of the reasons they have so much hell and confusion ever since, because that level of imbalance becomes its own curse. We done had the battle of the sexes waging over 2,000 years, and it's really funky now. But why do you think that is? Because those are the type things that Yahweh was about. That's not Enki, not Enkiite teaching. That is Yahwehistic teaching. But in any event, they went through all of this. Where have you been, and what can you do, and who was you when I did this, and who was that? And that goes on for a long time too. Do you know when the goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? With all of this blowharding that's happening at the end part of Job, I really do believe that this is Enlil speaking, the same one that just caused these curses on this man. But it finally does come down to the end where and again, I really know it in because he said, "Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaws with a hook?" And truthfully, Leviathan, from what I understand, was like one of the creatures that even Anunnaki couldn't f with, and it was already here. They couldn't do nothing with it either. So for God to be sitting here taunting Job with, can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? That's some Yahweh mess. It really is. But at the end of it, Job repented and confessed. Now, truthfully, he ain't really had nothing to repent or confess to. We established that in the beginning. They said he was an upright man, blameless before the Lord. But they done jerked with this man's head, stripped him of everything he owned, darn near took him out with pestilence and disease and oozing sores, so much so that he was like, whatever you say, I repent. I get it. I get it. I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is it? Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. They done broke this man down like an absolute fraction. But now he did. And again, after the Lord has spoken, now we start getting back to where this is the part that had me kind of wondering whether this was Enlil or Enki. And truthfully, because they were both having this contest, it could very well have been a little of both. When all of this, where was you and where was I, and all of that braggadocious stuff, that really sounds like Enlil, Yahweh. I just have to call him Yahweh to keep it, but Enlil is Yahweh. But then at the end of this book, it says, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, my anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job and offer up a burnt offering for yourselves. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer not to deal with you according to your folly. For you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. So Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did what the Lord had told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then he came to him, all his brothers and sisters, and all who had known him before, and ate bread with him in his house. And they showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a ring of gold. And the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he called the name of the first daughter Jemima, and of the second the name of Keziah, and the name of the third Karen Hapuk. And in all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers. And after this Job lived 140 years and saw his sons and his sons' sons 4 generations. And Job died an old man and full of days. Now, truthfully, like you said, every good and perfect present is from above. At the end, when it talks about, because they acknowledge they brought down evil upon this man, that's Yahweh. That's Yahweh all day. Because he was the one that stirred this pot to start with. Enki didn't want to do that. Enki allowed it. But Yahweh, Satan, took this man through his paces just to prove a point. So while they stand on the pulpit and tell us about Job as a righteous man and the example of Job and how faithful was he and all the rest of that, I want to remind everybody about what Hebrews says about all these faithful men and women of old, because this was the thing that really gut punched me when I really was led to looking in the scriptures, he at the end of the book of Hebrews, when it's, I mean, no, in Hebrews 11, when it talks about faith, and though it says, uh, what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and they were naming all these different men and women of old and all the things that they did. They talked about Moses. I think they mentioned Job up in there earlier. All of that, and but it says they were stoned, they were sown in two, they were killed with the sword, they went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. So the way of Yahweh is to make these people a whole bunch of promises, test them to within an inch of their life, and guess what? At the end of the day, you still don't get what you was promised, because Yahweh has decided that our faith should be sufficient. That is the nature of Yahweh, and that is the other, to me, the true lesson that should come out of the book of Job. It's a heavy one, but it's an important one for us to know who we're actually dealing with here and how we can make choices. Because Yeshua spent 3 entire years, he spent 18 years preparing for his ministry, and 3 entire years going in and amongst the people on a daily basis, and his constant message over and over and over, as we saw from the book of John: you do not know my Father. You don't worship my Father. You worship your father, the devil, Satan. He told him that. He just didn't call him Satan, but he said straight up, you're not worshiping my Father. You're worshiping your father, the devil. He said that, and they put it in the book. And yet, 2,000 years later, people are still lining up, giving a 10% of their everything, and swearing tooth and nail, fighting wars, unaliving each other, being hateful, judgmental, and everything else for people that do not line up to continue to serve the Jews' father, the devil. Jesus said that I didn't. Don't come after me, because I'm not hating on nobody. And I respect everybody's right to do whatever they want to. But Yeshua was absolutely frustrated because he tried over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to tell them, y'all got it wrong. I'm from a different place. My father that sent me is not the same father that y'all are worshiping. My father is love. My Father does not judge. My Father is kind. My Father wants to bring in peace. My Father does not require blood sacrifice. My Father, all of those things that He's telling them, and yet these people were still lining up and delivering themselves and their children to serve the bloodthirsty God. And we're still doing it to this day. Those are the lessons that we need to understand and extract from the scriptures. And I'm so very glad that you allowed me to take this time with you to give those my thoughts about the book of Job. We're going to mosey into the lost book of Enki and do the introduction and the attestation to that, because I keep promising and I keep getting sidetracked with the scriptures, but I do want to start getting into that so we can kind of go and look at them kind of side by side, because we got plenty of the apocryphal books to get through, as well as plenty of Sitchin's work to kind of look at the rest of the Anunnaki structure, because truthfully, I didn't know that whether we needed to get into the Anunnaki wars, but we really do, because Armageddon is not just a war, it's truthfully the final skirmish, if you will, of the Anunnaki wars. And it looks like prophecy is coming up on where it's going to be coming up here real soon. So we need to get into it, and we will. But in any event, thank you so much for joining me here today. Like I said, give the video a thumbs up if you haven't, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all on the next time. I love you ever so much. Thank you again for joining me. Namaste.